Good evening. Loud voice. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the last talk of this cycle. And I have to say, Mark Wilkinson, our new president, is incapacitated. So there's something about being president of this society, because we've had three presidents, including myself as acting president, who at some stage became incapacitated. So it's a bad idea to be president, that's all I can say. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Graham to introduce Chris, who's our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, as Mike says, the last in our winter-spring series. The only thing I would add before we get started is that come July time or thereabouts, I will start to put together the program for next year. And if there are any topics amongst the audience here physically tonight, or for that matter, the online audience, if there's anything you would like to hear a lecture about or a speaker you've heard elsewhere, please let me know and I'll just add that into my collection box and see how I can work that in. We will next year visit some of the other chapters in the forthcoming Geology of Scotland that we haven't dipped into so far. So I have got some material already stacked up, but if there are anything particular that the audience would like to hear, please do let me know and I'll see what I can do to work that in. It makes my life an awful lot easier. Tonight, I'm very glad, very pleased to be able to welcome Chris Jack from COWI. I think I've got that right in terms of its pronunciation. COWI Engineering UK, based in Glasgow, and COWI are really a global operation in terms of their engineering interests, major civil engineering infrastructure projects. I think the larger the better in some ways is how it seems to me. Chris is someone I've met getting involved with something which Edinburgh GeoSoc are becoming more familiar with, and that is the hydroelectric scheme at Coire Glas by Loch Lochy. We've already had one EGS trip to see the site, and I hope we'll be able to revisit the site as the works progress over the next 7 or 8 years or so, and see what becomes or what gets created in this corner of the Highlands. So I thought it was a good idea to get someone who really knows what they're talking about as far as the engineering geology and the engineering behind this project. I find it a fascinating area as a geologist, and that's all very well. But let's hear what is really involved in putting one of these major schemes together. Chris has a couple of decades of experience of this kind of work, both from the engineering geological point of view. He's a geologist of this department. He did his master's in Newcastle and has spent his time since getting more deeply involved in the project management side of things, I guess, and less geology, but that's the way of these things. But he's very well placed to tell us just exactly what kind of scope the Coire Glas project has, what the ambitions are for this project, and what it's going to deliver for UK PLC in the future. So, Chris, I'm very pleased to see you here, and I look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Graham. That's far too kind. And I think if you wanted someone who could tell you what's really going on and really knows about it, we would have got someone else. But does this work? Yeah, okay. So yeah, what I want to talk to you guys about tonight is the Coire Glas project, just give a kind of general introduction to it, but also talk about the engineering geological aspects and how that then affects the engineering, which in my line of work is what most of my colleagues care about. They don't really care too much about the geology unless it's important. So let's get going. So it's been in the news a bit recently, Coire Glas. Some of you might have seen it on the BBC last week. So this is quite timely in that respect. But the project's been developed by SSE Renewables. It's the first large pump storage scheme to be developed in the UK in approximately 40 years. And based on the current plans, it will generate 1.5 gigawatts, and it will have 30 gigawatt hours of storage. And I'll say a little bit about what that means. And on our current program, we're hoping to have that commissioned about 2030. The figure on the right there, that red line, that polygon, that just shows the approximate site. Sort of basically between Fort Augustus and Fort William, basically. So this zooms in on the site. So you can see a few things in this image. You can see like a little blue shape. That's the reservoir. It's much bigger than that. And does this have a pointer, Graham? No. Oh yeah, I'll point to it. Yeah, so there's a reservoir. This is the underground powerhouse complex. So this is the power station. These are the access tunnels. And there's possibly going to be a switchyard up here. So, I mean, just very broad brushstrokes. That's how the scheme's laid out. And this just shows the topography. So here we have Coire Glas. So this is where the reservoir will be. There's currently a small loch in there. This is the main way into the site from Kilfinnan. And the powerhouse will be sort of roughly about there. And just some photographs. This is what the site looks like from the other side of the loch. So kind of from about the A82 for people who know the area. So there's the quarry up at the top there. Powerhouse probably be sort of there, but 500 meters down. And it will all come out just to the right of that small alluvial farm. And this is what the quarry looks like. So there's the small loch I was talking about. The mountain at the back there is a Monroe. That's Rhona Coire Glas, if we've got any baggers. And the reservoir in there will be about 92 meters deep. So when the dam gets built, if it gets built, it will be the tallest dam in the UK. Currently, the tallest dam in the UK is 91 meters. This one will be 92 meters. So, but also this one's much wider as well. So it'll be by some margin the biggest dam. What's pumped storage? Just for the benefit of anyone who doesn't know. Conventional hydroelectric scheme has a reservoir at the top or a river, and the water goes down through the turbines and out, and it generates electricity there. Pumped storage does the same thing when it's generating, but just if you've got cheap electricity due to surplus renewable energy, for instance, which is one of the main drivers for the scheme, because everybody else asks the question, what do we do when the wind blows at night? Well, what we do is build Coire Glas, and then we can use that cheap electricity to pump the water back up, and it basically is a giant water battery. And it's going to give you a kind of impression of how this fits into the current situation in the UK right now. So there's 4 existing pump storage schemes in the UK. There's Foyers, Cruachan in Scotland. You can see them on the map, and the Ornwig and Festiniog in Wales. And Coire Glas is there at the bottom. And so, as I say, it'll have 1,500 megawatts of generation capacity, with 30 gigawatt hours of storage. And this is the key thing. Pump storage schemes in the past were often about, the classic example was the advert break in EastEnders, and suddenly there's a spike in energy demand. That's not really the main driver for Coire Glas. The main driver for Coire Glas is actually the storage. So Coire Glas will more than double the storage capacity, which is currently 23.4 gigawatt hours. And the need for pumped storage, well, it's the most efficient large-scale storage technology. It's about 80% efficient. Current battery technology can't get anywhere near that kind of efficiency. It can provide a very fast response, less than 30 seconds. So you need your electricity. The grid calls for it. It's available. Obviously, we're looking at closing all of our coal and presumably most of our gas-fired power stations by 2050. So we need to replace generation capacity. I've talked about the renewables. There's another reason for it, though, is that it can provide stability on the grid. Our grid is now a lot less stable than it used to be. It's much easier to have a stable grid. If you've got nuclear power, coal power stations, now we've got all these disparate energy sources, and the frequency on the grid needs to be stabilized. And you can spin the turbines at a power plant like Coire Glas to help smooth out the frequency on the grid, which is an important thing that the national grid needs to do. And the existing pump storage schemes already do that. And obviously, it's this, you know, if we've got an anti-cyclonic system, we've got no wind, then this can generate electricity in that gap. And in the context of us trying to reach net zero, so this is basically what we need to do by 2050 to kind of get to net zero. And Coire Glas, the construction period for it, being from roughly about 2024 to 2030, is on the sort of steepest decline that we need. So it's contributing to that. So what's 1.5 gigawatts? Right, I've got a bad joke now, but I'll see if anybody spots it. If anybody doesn't get my bad joke, you can ask me afterwards. So these are the things that you'll get for 1.5 gigawatts. So to give you some examples, you know, you can get about 4.7 million photovoltaic panels will generate the same amount of electricity. You know, 13,500 Nissan Leafs, you could charge them with it. And in our, you know, probably in the most practical context, it can power about 1.1 million homes, or about 550 large commercial or industrial facilities if you had the air conditioning going 24 hours a day. Slightly different metric, but the 30 gigawatt hours, so that's the storage part of it. So that's equivalent to the amount of energy 3 million homes will use in 24 hours. So it's not all of the energy Scotland needs, but it's more or less all of the domestic energy that Scotland needs for 30 hours. So it's quite big. So this is quite a nice diagram. There's a lot of things in this talk that, in fact, the vast majority of it I didn't do, okay? So this is an example of something I didn't do, but it's quite nice. So here's the dam and the reservoir up here. And we've got the head race tunnel that comes in. There's also a gate shaft. There's the pressure shaft that takes it down to about 500 meters depth. And there's also a surge adit. So without getting too technical, if you shut a turbine off quickly, you get a water hammer effect. The water basically kind of rebounds off the turbine and back. And you need to have some space for that water to go. And that's what the surge adit's for. So if the turbine has to stop very quickly, and that can happen, then water will go shooting up this shaft, not above the surface, but to sort of close to the surface. And then we've got the power station complex. That's very complicated. I'll show you another image of that later. And we've got other things like the main access tunnel. We've got an exploratory adit that we're in the process of constructing at the moment, an emergency access tunnel, and the tail race tunnel. So that's where the water comes out, or alternatively comes back in from Loch Lochy when we're pumping. So that's pretty good general overview of the scheme. I think the thing to think about is the scale of this is incredible. It's enormous. You know, it's like small on the picture, but it's huge. This shaft is only slightly shorter than the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world. You can fit Durham Cathedral in these caverns down here, so it's pretty big. So history of the project, it's kind of been kicking around with SSE since about 2006. So they did a site selection survey. I know in the around about 2010, the BGS had some involvement as well. At that time, and then in 2010, there was feasibility studies and an environmental impact study. There was a planning application submitted in 2011 that was granted in 2013. In 2017, they submitted a new planning application, and they were upping the generation capacity in that planning application from 600 megawatts to 1,500 megawatts, because there was a better economic case for it. And you don't actually spend a lot more getting that extra capacity because so much of the work is in the construction and the civil engineering aspects. That planning application was granted in 2020, and that's sort of really kicked off the current phase we're in now, where we've had a tender process. The company I work for was involved with another company called Stantec, producing a reference design so that the job could be priced by the bidders. We also had bids for the exploratory work, so that's the surface ground investigation, this underground adit that I'm going to talk to you a bit more about, that's under construction at the moment. And we had 4 bidders at that point. So there was 4 civils bidders building to sort of build the holes in the ground and the dam. And there was 2 mechanical and electrical bidders. So they're the guys who come in and build the turbines and the control panels and the transformers and these aspects. And where we are right now, so we've been doing engineering geological mapping on and off for the last couple of years. The BGS has also been involved doing some geological mapping for us too. We had the first blast 2 weeks ago today. So we blasted at the portal of this exploratory tunnel, and that was successful, and nobody got blown up or anything like that. So I was quite happy. And we're looking at probably starting the underground tunneling for this exploratory adit, probably late April, May time, based on the current program. And something that almost never gets said in a civil engineering project is that's slightly ahead of program. So we'll see if I can say that at the end of the project, but so far so good. The ground investigation is underway. So that's the surface drilling. And we're currently doing a second stage of tendering. So those 4 bidders have reduced down to 2. So 2 bidders are now doing a very detailed design and a competitive process to win the work. And there's 1 mechanical and electrical bidder at the moment. So it's halved. And then in the future, so SSE are looking to make what they call their final investment decision in 2024. So that's, once we've done this tunnel, once we've done the ground investigation, once they've worked further on the economics, etc., they'll make a decision about whether to proceed or not. If they decide to go ahead, then the current program is for the main works. So that's everything to build the job, will happen between 2024 and 2030, with an aim of being operational about 2030. And this picture here is it's a little bit dark, but it's a visualization of the dam. So there's the dam and the reservoir. So who's involved with this? Like everyone, I kind of said it's not me doing most of it, and that's very much true. So we've got a very big team of geologists and geoscientists working on this project. And there's geoscientists working for SSE, Stantec, our partners in this, and COWI. And the reason I've got this arrow with STORE is for this next phase, we're going to go into a partnership between us, Stantec and COWI, and that's the STORE JV entity. We've got Strabag. So Strabag are an Austrian contractor, but they also operate in the UK. And they're building this exploratory adit right now. And we have Fugro, who are doing the ground investigation. So they're doing both the surface ground investigation, but we're also going to have drilling at the end of the exploratory adit. And they're working as a subcontractor for Strabag. So they've kind of got 2 roles on the project. They've kind of outright won the surface ground investigation, but they're also with Strabag to do the underground drilling. And, not forgetting the BGS, Graham, who's here, Ramesh, Martin, have been doing a lot of really great work over the last couple of years. And then before that, 10 years ago, helping us to understand the geology and helping us to explain that to all of the various parties who aren't geologists. We've got Dr. Chris Snee, who's an expert in contracts and engineering geology around hydroelectric power projects. So he's helping us. We've got a few projects going with the University of Strathclyde. I'll say a little bit more about that. Professor John Cosgrove from Imperial College did a regional structural study for us. And also Steve Parry of Parry Engineering Geological Services has been doing geomorphological and landslide mapping work for us. And there's overlap between all these parties. I don't mind that, it's the gaps we're trying to avoid. And we've got a big team of people on site. So at the moment, we've got about 5 engineering geologists on site. When the tunneling starts in a month or two, we'll have about 11 or 12 people, because we need to cover all the shifts. We've got to cover large areas of the surface. So it's not often you get such a big team of geologists on site for a civil engineering project. So yeah, we've got a really great team from Stantec and COWI there working on site. So what are we doing? We're doing lots of things. Geomorphological mapping and landslide studies, like I said, geological mapping of the surface, the bedrock. Some of that's got quite an engineering geological character to it. Geophysics, we're doing seismic refraction, mainly round about the dam and the borrow pit areas for that. We're doing resistivity. We're doing, Strathclyde University are doing a very interesting, quite cutting edge bit of work around putting some microseismic detectors on site to see if the construction noise can pick up and image the ground. So that's just been set up on site last week, actually, but they've still got to put a few more instruments out. We've got intrusive ground investigation, so that's the drilling, and we also have downhole geophysics in some of those holes, the various suites of instruments. Tunnel mapping, so once we get into the exploratory adit, that's getting mapped in a lot of detail. Drone surveys, we're doing a full photogrammetry and LiDAR record of the exploratory tunnel. 3D geological models, that all feeds into the rock engineering, the hydrogeology. We're looking at the geochemistry, and the geologists also are heavily involved in the technical management of the project, the construction supervision, the health and safety aspects, because there's stuff about the health and safety that we understand better than other people, especially around the tunneling. SSE have been really proactive about setting up STEM activities in the local schools in the Great Glen, and we're participating in that. Probably not this talk, probably a different one. And yeah, and we're supporting the University of Strathclyde with this project, also some PhD students. And yeah, getting to the interesting bit now, so geology. So we're located in the northwest of Scotland, and we're to the northwest of the Great Glen. So that means we're in the Moyne supergroup, doesn't it? No, we're in the Loch Ness supergroup. So that caused a little bit of confusion on the project for the non-geologists, but I think it's been ironed out now. And we're in and or adjacent to the Great Glen Fault Zone, which is a major risk on the project. And I'm sure probably everyone, if not most people here, know that that's one of the largest faults in the UK, up to 3 kilometers wide. We've got a fault core that's maybe 1 kilometer wide in places. And because of this, understanding the Great Glen Fault Zone in a kind of, you know, I'm driving a tunnel through it, and this is what I can touch with my hand, is really important. And that's not something at that scale, at that sort of tunnel scale, it's quite hard to know what the Great Glen Fault Zone is going to be like, because most of the studies are inevitably quite regional. So that's a big uncertainty and a big risk. And superficial deposits, for anyone who's into that sort of thing. So, you know, we've obviously got till up in the quarry, we've got these areas of peat, and that's important from both an engineering point of view. It doesn't tend to be a very good thing to build on, but also now these things, there's a lot of attention on them environmentally, because they're good stores of carbon. So there's sort of 2 aspects to the peat that we need to pay attention to. We've got hummocky glacial deposits, we've got glacial fluvial deposits, we've got some talus. But yeah, mostly in the middle, we've just got lots of nice rock outcrop, especially up at the top here at the cliffs, things like that. This is quite interesting. There's a landslide deposit sort of mapped here. It's sort of a kind of post-glacial thing, that, isn't it? And I think I'm asking Graham now. That's not actually where the dam is. The dam's a bit more over here, but obviously we're quite interested in that and paying a bit of attention to it as well. And this is a couple of photographs that Steve Parry took. This is just showing the area. This is approximately the area of the north abutment. And you can see these arcuate features here, these small landslide scars. So this is something we're aware of. It's something we can deal with from an engineering perspective. But obviously the slopes here are at or near their natural angle of repose. And also we've got a lot of these drainage lines that come down, particularly coming down to that alluvial fan I pointed out in the photograph. And these now and again have a debris flow come down them. So they probably don't affect the works in a big way, but from a construction and a maintenance and a long-term access, we need to kind of consider these features as well. I'm not going to try and explain this. The reason I put this up was just to show what detailed work we've done on the geomorphology and on the landslide study. So this is one of the suite of figures that Steve Parry's produced, and this is his thing, landslides. So you can see things like the alluvial fans, these drainage lines, and he's sort of split it all up into different terrain units and rock types and things. And there's a suite of other figures, and I could probably spend 2 hours just talking about what he's done, but it's very detailed, it's very interesting, and it just shows we're paying a lot of attention to the surface processes as well. So site geology. So this is basically the BGS map with just a few other data that BGS has collected for us overlain on it. So I think the main things to notice are, here's the Great Glen Fault Zone effectively going across here. And here's the single lines that confuse a lot of people because you say there's a fault and they think that's the fault and that's the fault and that's the fault, but yeah, the whole thing's the fault. So that can be quite a difficult message to get across to non-geoscientists. So fault, these little red pluses are just showing that the date this figure was done where mapping had taken place, and there's green dots, that's areas where the BGS had done some mapping for us. And then the red dashed lines are photographic lineaments from a study that the BGS did, trying to pick out structure in the rock mass. And the black lines, I think, Ramesh, you did the black lines? so yeah. So, but the probably a few key things are, yeah, so the bottom part of our project is sitting in the fault zone. And the cavern is about, you can't really see it, but I can see it. That's the cavern. So it's right in its current location, and we might move it, is right in the edge of this sort of more fractured looking area, let's say. So we might well move it a bit. And also we've got this fault coming up the valley here. That's interesting for the dam because we'll need to grout that fault up to make sure water doesn't flow under the dam. And potentially you might expect the soil might be a bit deeper there or something like that. So that might cause some issues for how the dam settles. Will it all settle at the same rate or will it settle differentially? Although, to be honest, it's a rock-filled dam, so it was quite forgiving. Other things, there are these intrusions, these acidic intrusions kicking around. So there aren't any directly at our site, but we don't know that there might be something underground. And there's kind of connected somewhat to this more fractured area. There's a bit that's more magmatic and politic. So there's an area of rock here that's less good, let's say, using a technical term, than the rock over here, which generally seems to be a bit better. There's just a section showing the same sort of thing. So here's these sort of acidic intrusions. Here's the Tarvie Psammite Formation. So that's the main rock unit we're dealing with once we get out of the fault zone. We've got obviously some faults, we've got some folds, we've got this magmatic bit. And here's the Great Glen Fault Zone, and the rock's cataclasic. And we're very, very interested where this is, this boundary. and I think picking that out is going to be easier said than done. I very much suspect when we tunnel through it. The Great Glen Fault, here it is. Here's the site. I don't think we need to dwell on this. I mean, basically we've got Dalradian and now Loch Ness supergroup on the other side. But obviously the fault has got a long history. It's moved a lot. The rock's quite damaged. It's got different phases of movement, different directions of movement, so it's complicated. And we need to understand that complexity and translate that into engineering terms so we can safely build certainly the lower part of the works. And this is what I tend to show people who don't understand that the Great Glen Fault Zone isn't a line. So it's just a conceptual model. It's from Fossen, but this is what we're dealing with. We're probably starting off maybe near the bottom here and going through this damage zone in the Tarvie Psammite Formation as we head up into the hillside. And yeah, explaining that is challenging. Converting that into technical and contractual language is incredibly challenging. So it's kind of bane of my life a little bit. And this is quite a nice model. This one works really well for explaining it to people. This is something that John Cosgrove did as part of the work he did for us. And basically the blue is the core zone, and then the grey is Tarvie Psammite Formation, but the damage zone of that. And then obviously we've got Riedel shears and sort of related faults to the Great Glen Fault Zone in this. And so when someone asks me, why can't you tell me where the edge of the Great Glen Fault Zone is, I show them this picture usually. This is another good picture to show them when you're trying to do that. So this is from Stewart and Strachan, and we've annotated it with project locations, again, to try and help explain it. So we have this cataclasic area. We've also got sort of, larger faults here. And we start getting, blocks, wedges, lenses, whatever, of Tarvie Psammite Formation. And at some point you reach the boundary, is that the boundary? Maybe in this sketch. And then we go into the Tarvie Psammite Formation, but there's still structure, there's still faults. And this is what we really need to get across to everyone on this project. So, this is probably roughly where we think the outlet structure and the alluvial farm is. Conceptually, don't get a ruler, right? And then we've got the boundary, maybe the surge shaft might be a bit like this, maybe the dam and upper reservoirs up there. So this is just to help people who aren't geologists to conceptualize it a bit better. This is the photolineament study that the BGS did again. So probably the interesting thing to point out is a lot of the structure does have consistency to it. We've obviously got, structure coming down here like this. We have structure going this way. We've got some structure going that way. We've got a north-south structure. And you can start to split it up into structural domains as well. You can look at different parts of the site, and there's different patterns. This is a zoom in Ramesh's call, we'll call it. But, again, you can see there was a lot of work done in there to map the faults that are in that area. And these individually, these aren't huge features, but it's the net effect of all of them. And the question is, and we don't know the answer to it yet, and I don't think we'll know the answer till we've done the drilling, is can we put the cavern there and it be viable? Or do we need to move it somewhere, maybe over here or something like that to do it? That fracture in that faulting doesn't necessarily make the cavern unviable at that location. It probably certainly makes it more challenging if it intersects. I was talking about structural domains. So again, this is some more work that I've stolen from the BGS, but you can see we've got the site has been split up into structural domains. So we've got the dam site, we've got Sean Vale, which is one of the peaks on the ridge above the loch. We've got this coal, the one I've just been talking about, Meal and Jerkig, which is further along the ridge, and we've got the Great Glen Fault Zone. And you can see there's things that are consistent and there's things that change. You know, for me, the top three, there's quite a reasonable degree of consistency between them. You see this north-south structure, you see this sort of east-west structure, you can see it again there, you can see it. But there's definitely a change at Meal and Jerkig, and at the fault zone, things sort of swing around a little bit. And in situ stress, so the in situ stress, this is really, really important for the cavern design, because the cavern's at a depth of about 600, 650 meters. And at that depth, that's where you start transitioning from an engineering perspective, the rock being controlled by blocks falling out, very simply, to you starting to get into the domain where you start getting stress controlled failure of the rock and the boundaries of the excavations. And that all depends on the relative mix, if you like, between the vertical stress due to the overburden and the horizontal stresses you have on the ground due to tectonics and things like this. So we don't have any data for Coire Glas yet, although we will by this time next year. But this is from Glendow, which is on the other side, and it's the only nearby data we have. And what that's showing is that this is showing the horizontal stress. So this is the principal horizontal stress, and this is the minor horizontal stress. And it's showing that at Glendow, we were kind of basically from about 20 to about 25 megapascals, but only down to a depth of about 250 meters. So you need to project this down to about 650 to see, you know, what sort of stresses we might be getting up to, you know, 40. And then, you know, the minor ones are sort of floating around 10, say. Another thing the BGS did for us was a very detailed seismic assessment. That was a pretty in-depth report, and can't honestly say I understood every part of it. But the things I did understand was they were saying that there was a 475-year return period, and we had about a sort of 4 to 4.1 magnitude earthquake being predicted on that time scale. 10,000-year return period, about 4.9 to 5.9, so actually quite an appreciable earthquake. And the maximum credible was 7.1, you know, one day. And then this figure on the right is just showing some data over, I guess, the last sort of 400 years. Obviously, the older ones are inferred from other evidence, and the more recent ones are measured. But you can see the scale of these dots is the smaller one is 3 to 4, larger ones 4 to 5. And there are plenty of these 4 to 5s kicking around in the Great Glen area. So we need to be aware of that. And this kind of touches on another question I get asked about once a week, which is the Great Glen Fault Zone active? I've never got a straight answer to that from the BGS. Anyway, and this is a 3D model we started to build. So this will get much more complicated. It's quite simple at the moment, but the drilling and everything that's going to inform that will come soon. And again, this has largely been developed by the BGS actually, but we have a Great Glen structural domain. We've got this Meal and Jerkig. So I was talking about this ridge. This is Sean Vale. This is Sean Vale. This is Meal and Jerkig. And this is this coal we've been talking about. So yeah, Great Glen, Meal and Jerkig. This is the more faulted area, but not the Great Glen Fault Zone, sort of related. This is the best rock possibly, and this is other good rock, but on the other side of this fault. So if the way engineers would probably see this is bad, medium to bad, good, and good. Okay. So that's kind of where we are. So we're doing these exploratory works that I mentioned. So why are we doing that? Well, obviously we're trying to collect geological and geotechnical data. And the key focus for that is the Great Glen Fault Zone and the carbon complex. It's pretty obvious, really. And the way we're doing that is the surface ground investigation. I mean, SSE have invested a lot in this phase. It's the actual ground investigation in the tunnel is about 60 million. The entire package of works that needs to sit around that to make that happen is about 100 million, which is probably the figure you might have heard if you saw the BBC report last week. So that's what they've invested in this. And that is more than you normally get, let's say. So yeah, we've got a really great opportunity to collect a lot of excellent information, and the intention is in the fullness of time that will make its way out into the wider geoscience community. Yeah, exploratory adit is about 900 meters long, and these boreholes at the surface. I'll show you a bit more of that in a minute. And fundamentally, a lot of what we're trying to do is trying to understand the risk. You know, that's the kind of language that a big client like SSE speaks. So money, uncertainty, risk. So you need to kind of, again, it's another thing you kind of need to try and translate this geological information into is so what? And that might be so what, here's a number. So you could do a design. It might be so what, here's a contractual term, or it might be so what, here's the risk. Yeah. So fieldwork, got some pretty pictures of some fieldwork that's happened over the last few years. The first thing that ever happened that was in any way geological was some peat probing. That was actually done as environmental impact assessment. And this goes back to this thing about peat being a big topic now. We've had geological mapping by the BGS in 2011, 2021, 2022. We should have more this year. Engineering geological mapping by Stantec and COWI over the last couple of years and ongoing, like as we speak. And the natural terrain hazard review that I mentioned that Steve Parry did. And the exploratory adit, the drilling at the end, and the surface ground investigation. Just an example of the sort of thing we're doing. So this is some of the engineering geological mapping we've done. So this is a engineering geological description. There's a British standard that tells you how to do it. Some basic information about the outcrop. Here's some photographs of material that is sitting within the Great Glen Fault Zone, cataclastic material. This is the forestry. These are some forestry cuttings down near Loch Lochy, where Forestry Land Scotland have conveniently been digging around recently and give us these exposures. And in engineering, we're always trying to put things into numbers. So we've got these rock mass classification schemes, and they've got names like the Geological Strength Index, rock mass rating system, the Q system. We normally use at least 2 or 3 of them because you can't really believe just one of them. Yeah, so you're kind of trying to build up a picture. And you can put these things directly into design now, and that's what their purpose is. And this is some field sketches from Lucy Mackay, who I think did a talk at, or is this yours, Ramesh? This is your notebook, sorry. So this is your notebook, misattributing. But again, this is good because this is tying in with this idea of lenses and blocks of material within, you know, poorer material, more cataclastic material, things like this. But the other thing I like about this is the previous photograph, you don't really get any sense of structure from that. Just that now that Ramesh has kindly drawn red lines all over it, we can all believe it. And this is just a little bit further along. So again, same sort of idea. This bit looks a bit poorer. It's a bit more transitional into sort of more soil-like material from an engineering perspective and rock. And again, you can see that there's, you know, plenty going on in there. There's just some photographs of some of the, you know, sort of faults. You know, we've got some gouge. And then it's, as you might expect, it's a spectrum of material. You know, we've got everything from pretty intact, well, cataclasic, that just looks like a bit of rock. The engineers go, great, it's rock. And then you've got a spectrum through this to this, you know, and obviously we need to account for that whole spectrum in the design options we have for how we line the tunnels, how we size the tunnels, etc. I just wanted to show this because it shows that because the discontinuities in the rocks, the joints and the shear fractures, they're not usually the most glamorous part of structural geology, but they're totally critical in engineering. So we spend a lot of time looking at these features because these are the things that things fall off and fall out of. So we're doing a lot of taking the depths, the direction, how persistent they are, how do they terminate? Do they terminate in the rock? Do they terminate against other joints? How various ways of looking at the shape on a small and a larger scale. This is an engineering parameter to do with roughness. The aperture, the infilling, the seepage. All of these things are really critical when you're doing rock engineering design. And the ground investigation, so this is pretty interesting. I'm not going to try and show you all the ground investigation. I think the main points of this slide are, one, these aren't easy places to get a drilling rig to, especially here. This is up at the col that I've been talking about. So the plan is to do at least a 250-meter deep borehole and probably a 750-meter deep borehole down here to the cavern location. And that won't be the deepest borehole in the UK by any means, but I can't think of another one that's ever been drilled on the top of a hill like that. So Fugro are setting that up right now. And that has 24-hour working. They have accommodation up there for 10 people. There's a helicopter coming over from Switzerland just to lift the drilling rig up there because it's such a large drilling rig. And that is incredibly cool. And then there's obviously quite a lot of, I'm not showing it here, but there's quite a lot of ground investigation happening up at the dam, as you might imagine, boreholes, the geophysics, trial pits, which is just basically pits dug by a JCB. And we've got quite a lot down at the bottom because we've got some large excavations there for where the tunnel outfall comes out, where the tunnel portals are. What we don't have a lot of is anything in between. And the reason for that is it's incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive to get there. So it's almost a bit like keyhole surgery or something. You know, we're kind of having to be really targeted about what we do. And then we're investing a lot of money in these key positions to get as much value out of them as possible, which is why we're doing all of this downhole geophysics and all of the laboratory testing we're going to be doing. This is, we've done very little testing. This is one of the 12 tests we've done so far because the ground investigation hasn't quite started. But this just shows a bit like what the Tarvie Psammite Formation is like. This is an unconfined compressive strength test. So, you know, this sample had a strength of about 40 megapascals. That's not too bad. That's rock as far as our engineering friends are concerned. And this is the exploratory adit. So as I say, the blast for this happened 2 weeks ago. So that portal's now been blasted out. They're just in the process of excavating out the spoil. This area has been cleared with trees for a variety of reasons. Partly because we wanted to check for boulders and landslides and things like that around the portal area. Partly because once you start doing something like this, Forestry Land Scotland requires you clear a sufficiently large area. So if you have a tree falls over in the wind, it won't impact on where you are. So we've done that. And then we've got this 900-meter long tunnel. It goes to just short of the cavern location. So the cavern location is about there. And at the end of it, there's a drilling gallery. So we'll go out in a T shape and form 2 drilling bays because there's going to be 2 drilling rigs, one there and one there. And the tunnel's not, well, it's reasonably big, but it's not big enough for 2 vehicles to pass each other. Certainly not 2 pieces of earth moving equipment. So we've got these laybys effectively, and these turning niches. And potentially, depending on how things work out, we might also do some investigation from these. And this is what it looks like. So this is the vertical and the horizontal scale is the same. So you can see it's a pretty steep slope. You know, you're not going to get a drilling rig up there very easily. Here's the tunnel. It falls down to the cavern location. And that level there is the level of the crown of the caverns. So that's what level it comes in at there. And you can see there's these turning niches. And it's actually reasonably steep, 7%, which is doesn't sound like a lot, but once you start getting much over 7%, that actually starts becoming quite difficult for a fully laden piece of earth moving equipment to drive up it, especially if it's full of water and things like that. This is what the adit looks like. So it's 4 meters at the bottom, it's 5 meters wide, it's 5 meters high. Obviously, there'll be some shotcrete. We're trying to leave it as unlined as possible, or as unlined as is safe, because we want to be able to see the rock, and we want to be able to bring people into the tunnel, the bidders, the contractors, to see the rock so they can see it for themselves. Obviously, where it's not safe to do so, we'll have to line it, perhaps if there's a fault. But then that's why we're doing this LiDAR and this photogrammetry survey of the whole tunnel, so there'll be that permanent record of it. This isn't exactly how this array of drilling is going to be planned out. It's sort of illustrative. Here's the drilling gallery and the caverns in this area. The power station complex is in this area. And we have these directional boreholes coming out. And the longest one is sort of about 250 meters. That's about 2 kilometers of drilling. This is sort of very conceptual geological section, let's say. So this just shows a section through the whole work. So here's the intake. This is the gate shaft. So you can shut it off and close it down. This is the surge adit, pressure shaft, powerhouse. This is the lower surge shaft. These are the structural domains I showed on the 3D model. We're just showing them as vertical because we don't actually know how the boundaries go, you know. So this is, again, this is this thing about the 3D model is going to evolve and improve. You know, the only real information we've got at the moment is at the surface and a few little boreholes down here. That a year from now we'll have much more. What have we got? So it's 500 meters of head. That's the level between the top and the bottom. The dam's 92 meters high, 650 meters long, 67 underground structures, 18 kilometers of underground structures, about 4.6 million tons of rock excavation, possibly a 6 kilometer long cable tunnel. That's still been looked at. And we're at about 600, 700 meters down. So wrapping up. So what's the key challenges? So I think if you're a geologist and you get a project like this, one of the key challenges is separating out what you think is really interesting and cool from what everybody else cares about. It's a challenge at the moment to find geologists with the right kind of skills. That's partly because of the way things are with recruitment and supply, probably mostly to do with the fact that we just haven't really done anything like this in the UK in decades. And yeah, for me, as you've probably got the sense of it, explaining the important things that are important and interesting from an engineering perspective that are geological to non-geologists is a lot of my job now. Uncertainties, the nature of the Great Glen Fault Zone, as I've talked about where the boundary is, the nature of that fractured faulted area that passes through the low point on the ridge that we showed a few figures of. Depths of soils in the quarry. We know how deep the peat is, but we don't know how deep all the rest of the soil is. And the nature of that fault that runs through the quarry and how difficult that is going to be to grout up. So yeah, and there's many, many more things, but that's definitely the main ones. And just to kind of finish up, I think I've hopefully conveyed my enthusiasm for it. It is the project of a lifetime for an engineering geologist, particularly one who comes from near Inverness. And it's an important part of the jigsaw puzzle for our energy transition in the UK. I don't think we should underestimate how big that challenge is. You know, if you watch the BBC report, they were saying we probably need at least 10 or multiples of 10 more of this sort of storage capacity to do the energy transition successfully. And for me, you know, there can be a bit of negativity about geology at the moment. It's sort of associated with oil, mining, things that are perceived to be dirty. You know, we all know that there's a challenge with recruitment in universities. But to me, this project demonstrates that there are lots of excellent career paths for geoscientists in the energy transition, and not just hydropower, wind, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen. All of these things are like massive at the moment. Really key things that governments, engineering firms, developers are looking at seriously now. And you would look at what's available and go, do we actually have enough people to do it? So I think that's a really great message to get out to perhaps kids in school, people who are thinking about careers in geology, because these opportunities are out there. So thanks very much for listening to me witter on for hopefully not too long.